Please state your full name.
I'm Jeffrey Edward Epstein.
Have you ever been convicted of a crime?
Yes.
What was the crime of which you were convicted?
Two counts. One, soliciting prostitution and procuring a minor for prostitution.
Did you in fact commit those acts?
I'm going to invoke my Fifth Amendment right.
How many times have you solicited a minor for prostitution?
Same answer.
How many times have you solicited a minor for prostitution in the state of Florida?
Same answer.
We need to talk about the Epstein list, the alleged drop and the declassification of the Epstein list that really never happened via Attorney General Pam Bondi, and the games and shenanigans, as I see it, that have been played with the list and the declassification that I personally believe we're never actually going to get. We're going to get into information that I feel like most people don't actually know about the Epstein story and about the operation he was running, that really spells out exactly why, in my opinion, it doesn't matter who is in office, who is in power, you're never going to get the list. But what we can do is go over who is pretty reliably on the list. We have some leads, and I want to actually name names in this video. Some of them are names you've probably heard, some are not.
Any comments on the alleged allegation of your connection with Jeffrey Epstein?
You had a number of meetings with Jeffrey Epstein, who, when you met him 10 years ago, he was convicted of soliciting prostitution from minors.
I had dinners with him. I regret doing that. Those meetings were a mistake. They didn't result in what he purported, and I cut them off.
This is something that people talk about with a sort of lack of seriousness that almost feels like a coping mechanism, like it's just too dark for people to really get real about and understand that our government has actually worked with Jeffrey Epstein. Governments have worked with Jeffrey Epstein, especially when I see anyone talk about the Israeli connections to the Epstein operation. Suddenly it becomes this conversation about anti-Semitism. I'm not really going to get into all that. I don't really care about that, whatever buzzwords float around. It's just the reality. There was intelligence connections between Britain and Epstein, the US and Epstein, Israel and Epstein. So when we go over the British intelligence connections, we're not going to get into this territory of like, this means I hate British people. And just because there was Mossad, aka Israel's intelligence agency's connection to the Epstein operation and participation in it, does not mean we hate Jewish people. That's stupid. And if you're coming with those low IQ comments, you can make them. Love the engagement. We're getting into all of it today. And the goal is that you learn things that you didn't know before and that give you some clarity as to why it doesn't matter who is in power. You're never going to get this list because it's the people in power that are on it. Hey everyone, it's Blaire White, and this is a paid collaboration with MyHeritage. You know what drives me crazy about today's media? The nonstop spin. It's like they're burying the truth. That's why I've been obsessed with uncovering my own truth via MyHeritage. I started building my family tree right on their platform. Watch this. I'm adding my mom and my dad. With instant discoveries, I clicked a button and bam, an entire branch of my family tree popped up. It adds in all these relatives, great grandparents you didn't know about, cousins, uncles. It's amazing. Using MyHeritage's 33+ billion historical documents, I found an old marriage license from my great-great-grandparents, old draft letters from family members that were drafted. And it's not just about records and dates. It's about discovering where you truly belong, where you come from, your roots. It's really fascinating and I think really important. And I shared a lot of it with my family. I was making calls like, did you know this about our family? And people's jaws dropped. Like, I truly educated my own family about all of our roots, not just my own. And it's shocking just how much historical detail you can get from MyHeritage. I even uploaded an old photo, repaired it, colorized it, and animated it. I mean, check out how vivid it looks now. I was blown away by everything I uncovered. It's incredible. If you're like me and you're wondering who you really are and where you really come from, you've got to try MyHeritage. Click the link in the description right now to get your 14-day free trial. Thank you again to MyHeritage for sponsoring today's video. we have to get into the absolute clown show, the clownery of it all, which was the, in my opinion, just PR stunt via Attorney General Pam Bondi. She went on Fox on March 19th and teased that she was going to be dropping the Epstein files.
What you're going to see hopefully tomorrow is a lot of flight logs, a lot of names, a lot of information.
So I woke up the day of thinking that we were actually going to finally be on the road to justice, and what we got was an entire PR stunt. A bunch of influencers went to the White House. They were given this binder titled Epstein Files. There was this really awkward photo op that happened.
They're all holding up binders. It was, oh, we got the Epstein Files, part 1 of the Epstein Files. Bro, like this is some type of prime time, movie or something where they're releasing it in season. Season 1, Epstein Files. Season 2, goofiness. Absolute goofiness.
I don't really know what type of thought was put into the optics of, holding up a binder of alleged crimes against children and smiling like you're getting handed the big check on Ellen or something. But that was a bit awkward, but I would have forgiven it if there was really something in the binders that was going to lead to justice. But what we got was a complete nothing burger. What we got was a list of redacted, of course, flight logs and call books of Epstein's, which were already released, I believe, like 1 or 2 years ago. Just names of all these celebrities that were in his personal address book and on the plane, which in my opinion is a tactic to muddy the waters, because there were a lot of people that I actually do not believe were committing any sort of crimes that were in Epstein's social circle, ended up on his plane, ended up, in his phone. This wasn't a client list though. And that was really what it was sort of advertised as. And that's really what people want. They wanted new information, which they didn't get. And they wanted names of people who were going to be facing the hammer of justice, which doesn't seem likely to ever happen now. I think a bunch of influencers were brought in, and because combined they have such an incredibly far reach, this was an attempt to appease the right. Because apparently this is like a right-wing thing to even want this list out. There's this article, Why is the Right So Obsessed with the Epstein list? Which, I have a better question. Why does the left not care? Like, why is this not a bipartisan push here to force the administration, whichever administration, to release the list? Probably because one of their presidents, Bill Clinton, is on the list. And don't worry, in case anyone thinks I'm a hypocrite here, we are going to get into whether or not I believe and look at the evidence Donald Trump is on the list or not. Just wait for that later in the video. It's a pipe dream, I think, to get full transparency from the government. And I think that is sort of the realization that people, even on the right, who had this maybe overinflated faith in the new administration have. I think it's sort of setting in now that, like, there are certain government secrets that are just not going to come out.
Nothing else, absolutely everything in there was already known. Not a single new thing was printed or offered. And this whole thing had been some sort of a rope-a-dope. I don't think it was designed to make any of the right-wing influencers look dumb, but they were not well served by the DOJ yesterday.
The only takeaway from that, in my opinion, is that it doesn't matter who's in power. Guess who really runs the world? Pedophiles. Elite pedophiles. Elite blackmail networks, which we're going to get into next. And it's as simple as that. Those are the real rulers of the planet, and that's a really bitter pill to swallow. But I think that if you know, you know. And I think that things start to make a lot more sense in the world when you start to understand that fact. Here's why you are never getting the Epstein list. The list of intelligence agency connections between Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein is probably actually much longer than the client list. There's so much that I really just have to spout off the list here. So, Ghislaine Maxwell's father, Robert Maxwell, was a Mossad agent, which for anyone who doesn't know is Israel's CIA. He had a book written about him in 2002 called Israel's Super Spy. What you got to do to be a super spy, I really don't know, but clearly we're talking some high-level stuff here. Ari Ben Manash, a former Mossad agent, said that Robert introduced Epstein to Mossad in the 80s to run a, quote, honey trap operation, using young girls to blackmail powerful people for information. He also claimed Epstein worked directly for Mossad, setting up blackmail schemes targeting politicians and elites worldwide.
Maintained that it was your employer, Robert Maxwell, owner of the Daily Mirror, You say that he was an Israeli agent, and you say that his daughter Ghislaine also, though, worked for Israel, and it was Robert Maxwell who introduced Jeffrey Epstein to Ghislaine Maxwell way before the 1990s, as mainstream media is reporting.
Correct.
I suppose what the most alarming allegations that you've been making are that the entire Epstein operation was a honey trap operation to entrap politicians, policymakers, celebrities, people in the media eye, basically to become Israel's assets.
Correct. That it became basically an intelligence operation to entrap different politicians.
And that is what this really is. You can look at the Epstein thing as just a bunch of perverts trying to be perverts and do it in secret, which it was. It most definitely was. But more than that, it was an entire blackmail operation. And this is the realization that I think people are having, is that the world is really ran by blackmail. This is how you really buy a politician. This is how you really buy a billionaire. Especially a billionaire, because how can you even buy a billionaire? Blackmail. This is why when they raided Epstein Island, and they took thousands, by the way, of pictures and videos, the boxes had the initials of celebrities and elites that we do know are probably on the list, because this was about getting footage. And this really reeks of the same things that we've seen and heard coming out of the Diddy situation, which is still unfolding, so I won't say too much on that. But this is really like the elite version of the Diddy ring. If the Diddy ring was just to get celebrities and artists and actors, this one was to get billionaires and politicians and princes and presidents. William Burns, now the CIA director, met Epstein 3 times in 2014 when Burns was Deputy Secretary of State, as reported by the Wall Street Journal. How many times has someone who ended up being the CIA director just popped in and visited you? Right. Epstein was actually a registered informant for the FBI in the early 2000s. They started investigating him nearly a decade before his 2008 plea deal, so they knew about his operation for such a ridiculously long time that the only way to look at it really is that they protected him for a ridiculously long amount of time. Epstein's business partner, Stephen Hoffenberg, said Epstein worked on, quote, national security issues involving blackmail and influence trading, and bragged about it routinely. Lex Wexner, Epstein's main backer, had ties to Mossad-linked figures and Israeli intelligence circles. So far we have the CIA, we have the FBI, we have Mossad. And what people don't know also about Robert Maxwell, I think people really focus in on the Israel connections with him, which was Ghislaine's father, is that he also had British intelligence ties and KGB intelligence ties. Declassified UK and Mossad sources confirmed that Robert Maxwell worked with MI6, the KGB, and Mossad simultaneously. Talk about a triple threat. Talk about it. And that's how you know this is literally about intelligence gathering. This is what these agencies do. They get information on powerful people and threats to their own borders. UK intelligence journalist John Sweeney has stated publicly that MI6 and MI5 were briefed on Epstein, but the British government never took formal action, raising the possibility of protection, or that Epstein was actually useful to them. And that's what it really is. I mean, you have this guy who has leaders of the world, incredibly important people, doing God knows what, only God knows what, on his island, recording them secretly. If you're the FBI, if you're the CIA, do you get in on that and start collaborating to get the information, or do you just lock him away? You gather the information. So that's a short but actually pretty long list of government ties that Epstein and Ghislaine had. But if you want to truly know this topic and really get into the story, you have to look at the occult connections. And this is something that people never, this is the stone no one ever wants to turn over. No one ever wants to think about, sort of an out of sight, out of mind thing, that our government is also deeply entrenched in the occult. This is one of those things that people just do not talk enough about, and it's because it's a really complicated topic. But there's a reason why our presidents and our heads of state and our elite and powerful go in the woods and do strange rituals and Bohemian Grove. And it's not for fun. It's not because they're being artistic. Several of the victims of Epstein and Maxwell have reported strange rituals being performed during, before, and after the abuse taking place. And that is something that is so scary to think about, as if the rest of it isn't scary to think about. But this is another really, really tough reality of the world, is that our government is entrenched in the occult. And so these people protect each other not only because they have aligned interests, but because they have aligned really, really messed up spiritual beliefs. And there's a lot of visual representation of Epstein's occult beliefs just on the island itself. When you look at this huge sundial that's placed on the island, when you look at the temple, which is sort of this iconic imagery now, everyone recognizes it. And it actually has occult meaning. And when it comes to the temple itself, there's a really great video by a YouTuber called Heritage First, who really laid this out better than I'm going to be able to. So I'm going to put a little clip in.
Jeffrey Epstein's temple looks exactly like a place called Hammam Yalbuga. Now, we go to Hammam Yalbuga's Wikipedia page. It says, Yalbuga is a Mamluk-era public bath in Aleppo, Syria. It was built in 1491. So this is a place that offers massages. You can go to a sauna here. And the connection that strikes out to me right away is massages is how Jeffrey Epstein groomed his young 14 to 16-year-old victims. So we go on the Wikipedia page and we click Mamluk era. What is that? On its Wikipedia page, we see Mamluk is Arabic, meaning property. It's an Arabic designation for slaves. So what is Jeffrey Epstein guilty of? He's guilty of sex trafficking, basically slaves. And what is the architecture that he styles his temple off of? But Mamluk architecture, which is indicative to slave culture. Go to Haddad's Wikipedia page. I kid you not, I can't make this up. Haddad is another name for Baal. It says Haddad was also called Pidar, Repu, or Baal Siphon, or simply referred to as Baal. I think it's worth noting that Baal is also used as the title for other gods as well, but still, the bull was the symbolic animal of Haddad, which also relates to Moloch.
Ghislaine Maxwell was also close with Marina Abramovic, whose picture you'll probably recognize because she's popped up in a lot of really negative, horrific, scary stories. She's often dismissed as just this artistic person, right? She's the one who's famous for her spirit cooking. And honestly, you can only dismiss her as just an artist, just someone who's having fun and being expressive if you don't have any knowledge of the occult, if you're not able to recognize rituals when they're being performed, not just because they look scary, because things can look scary without being of the occult and of dark magic, but when you actually learn about this stuff in an academic way, when you understand the long history of it, you can see it right in plain view. And the reason I'm bringing up the occult aspect of this is because this directly plays into why the names are also not getting released, because these people definitely protect their own when they come from the same spiritual heritage, when they come from the same practices that implicate each other if things come out.
When I was in the bedroom with him, because he used to take me into that small bedroom, and it was always dark and really cold, and then it was almost like when he was orgasming or something. Like I looked at him and suddenly his face like grew like big like this. And then I saw these huge black eyes like this. And then a big mouth with this horrible tongue and like this sort of dragon horn stuff, which is like almost like the devil or, you know, I can't explain really what I saw because I saw it like, I can explain it, but it's like so hard. I did paint it, but I burnt that painting because I just hated it.
And I understand this is one that people don't know a lot about. It's really getting into the weeds of things. But for me to not include it would be just participating in the sort of really counterproductive erasure of it. And I think it's very counterproductive to understanding how the world works, to pretend as if the occult is not deeply tied with government and with the elites as well. All right, now we're going to get into who we can reliably assume is on the list. And I don't just mean a list of associates. I don't mean just a list of people who have been on the plane, because it's actually a bit shallow to think that just because someone was on a plane with Epstein, and even specifically on his plane, means that they were a client and procuring prostitutes, underage or otherwise, through Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. It's not actually the same thing. And I think that that is the tactic and why they released the flight logs and the call book and all the celebrity names that they have, because it's muddying the waters. If everybody is a client, right, just for knowing him, just for being in a picture with him, just for being on the plane, just for being a friend, that means no one is. So we're actually going to narrow it down to people who there's a very good chance they were specifically clients, not just friends of Maxwell and Epstein. Number one is probably obvious: Bill Clinton. Clinton flew on Epstein's private jet at least 26 times. I don't know how you end up there 26 times, but he did, right? He did. And first of all, going to an island, a secluded island in the middle of nowhere, where you think it's completely private and among friends to do your dirty, is actually way less ballsy than bringing someone to the Oval Office, which he also did. So if anything, this is just the most obvious name. This is also a name that's been brought up by victims. So as long as they're not going to release the list, they are forcing us to speculate. And I'm going to go with what the victims say. I'm going to go with the fact that we already know one pervert was on the pervert's plane 26 times and on the island. Secret Service logs show that he left his protection behind on several of those flights. Why would a former president who is supposed to go everywhere with Secret Service feel comfortable enough or be hiding something so dark that even his Secret Service cannot be present for it? I mean, if 1 + 1 = 2. So right off the bat, we have a president of the United States, at one time the most powerful person on the planet. Damn, I even felt stupid saying that. I actually don't think the president is the most powerful person on the planet, but in theory, right? So next we have Prince Andrew. We got a president, we got a prince. It's already terrifying. There's no guesses needed here with Prince Andrew. He's also a known pervert, and one of Epstein's alleged victims directly accused him of raping her when she was trafficked by Epstein. There's a now iconic photo, iconic in a bad way, photo of them together, and Prince Andrew actually paid millions to settle out of court while denying the accusations. And again, what have we learned through the beginning of this video? This entire thing is an intelligence operation. So these are the prime people you want to end up on the island if you're trying to gather information and blackmail people, of course. You're going for the presidents, you're going for the princes. This isn't Diddy going for like J-Lo and like maybe some SoundCloud rappers. This is like the real deal. Next, we have Bill Gates. It doesn't get any less powerful here. I would actually argue Bill Gates is in many ways more powerful than a president. Gates met with Epstein multiple times after Epstein was convicted in 2008. The Wall Street Journal confirmed Gates even sought Epstein's advice about his marriage, which is interesting to bring up because Melinda Gates later said that Epstein was one of the final straws in their divorce. There wasn't a direct accusation she made, but in my opinion, you don't divorce someone because they're friends with someone who happened to have been exposed as a bad person. You divorce someone because they were participating in what that person was doing. So this to me is everything but Melinda Gates saying that Bill Gates was doing something with Epstein. Next, we have Ehud Barak. He was the former prime minister of Israel. He was photographed repeatedly outside Epstein's New York townhouse, the same one that was allegedly wired for blackmail. He invested in Epstein's companies and denied knowing anything, but photos show him entering the building with young women. There's some plausible deniability here, I guess, but he wasn't photographed with ugly women or old women, but with young women at the place. So we have Alan Dershowitz. This was Epstein's former lawyer and was accused by the same victim that accused Prince Andrew in a 2014 filing of having sex with her multiple times as a minor, orchestrated by Epstein. She claimed it happened at Epstein's properties, including Little St. James Island. Epstein's housekeeper, Juan Aseli, testified Dershowitz was a frequent visitor to the Florida mansion, often getting massages. This one's a weird one. David Copperfield comes up in the research. He's a famous magician. And again, that magic, I mean, we're already talking about the occult. It's like there's magic and then there's magic, right? One of Epstein's victims testified that Copperfield, the magician, attended an Epstein dinner and asked if she knew girls were paid to recruit others, implying awareness of the trafficking. There's no victim directly accusing him of sex, but his presence at Epstein's home and this comment suggests he might have crossed into client territory. This one is a bit of a stretch, but at the very least, you knew what was going on and you didn't do anything and you were still kicking it with this guy. Next, we have former U.S. Senator George Mitchell, the same victim that testified that Prince Andrew harmed her, alleged in her deposition that Epstein trafficked her to Mitchell, the former U.S. Senator, for sex when she was underage. Former New Mexico Governor Bill Richardson, a victim, claimed in a deposition that Epstein directed her to have sex with him when she was underage. Epstein's Zorro Ranch in New Mexico, his other property, where Richardson visited at least once, was also a known abuse site. He died in 2023, so whether or not he's burning in hell, we don't know, but it's possible. Now, a name that comes up all the time when talking about the Epstein list is obviously current president Donald Trump. And as far as I can see, there does not seem to be any evidence he was an actual client of Epstein. And when I say client, I mean client of this very illegal operation. But here's where this is not the own you think it is if you're trying to point out some sort of hypocrisy on my end, because I'm not throwing Donald Trump under the bus as well. If there were evidence for which I'm not just including every name of every associate, I'm including people who have real ties, real accusations, real victim testimonies, and I have no problem saying it is actually the easiest thing in the world for me to say that if Donald Trump was a client of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, he can burn in hell for all of eternity. I don't care if he's in office now or not when it happens. I would support him going down just like I would support every other person on this list going down. I don't care how good of a president he is in any other regard. I don't care that I voted for him. That all goes out the window if that were to come out. I'm completely open to that coming out, but as far as I can see, this is just a weaponized thing so far, posting pictures of him and Epstein, which you can play that game with really any celebrity. You can play it with Kamala Harris. You can play it with anybody. But what the Trump name lacks in connection to the Epstein story is actual victims going on record to say it. What it lacks is any evidence beyond him just being an associate who was on a plane. And if we're going to use the standard of proof as was on a plane with him or did go to parties that he was at as well, every person he ever interacted with is going to be on the list. And I just don't think that's realistic or possible. So again, I'm open to it. Unlike people who want to believe that despite Bill Clinton being the #1 name on this list, that he somehow, isn't. If Trump is, and it comes out, he can burn in hell. It's that easy.
I suspect that Melania has been whispering in Trump's ear. I think she was trafficked before, either bad trafficked or good, or just like knew Epstein and like knew that world a little bit. But I suspect that she's been whispering in his ear about what that really is and does and all that things, because she's been kind of like acting from the back a lot. But when you really dig into what Melania's been doing, she's very active in anti-trafficking and in protecting trafficked victims and girls and stuff. And as Trump, when he married her, and then they have Barron, and he's watching his son grow up. So you have this young child, and you have this wife telling you about her previous life, probably, and just whispering in your ear that like, this could be your legacy. This could be your legacy. This could be your legacy, right? Because he used to be friends with those people, even though I don't think he was blackmailed, because I think that would have come out when the Democrats were going for him.
Right.
And maybe he was involved in the trafficking a little bit because of the things that he bought and the people that he knew and like Roy Cohn connections. But I don't even know about that. But regardless, he knows the game. And then he marries Melania. And then more and more, like he was in charge when Epstein went down. He was the only one that when Epstein got arrested and they were going around asking for dirt, he was like, I'll fully cooperate. F that guy. I'll tell you everything that I know. And so I suspect that Melania has been instrumental in his sort of shift to being the only guy willing to go after those traffickers.
That was who is reliably on the list. That is all the intelligence connections and government connections Epstein had. And that is hopefully a very clear painting of a picture of why you will never get the list. And the least, or the most rather, that we can do is actually just listen to these victims and to understand that we need some sort of change in this world. We need... What's even the takeaway? I have no empowering thing to say. It's like everything's fucked. I wish I had some super empowering thing to say here, or some like, what's the move here? The move is just to continue applying pressure on the current administration to release this name and to, even more importantly, investigate and prosecute people on the list. Because as much focus as there is on just like spilling the tea, we need people to go to jail for like ever. I love you guys. Make sure you follow me on this channel as well as my podcast channel, The Blaire White Project. Follow me on X, Instagram, and now TikTok. I am back on TikTok, and I will see you in the next video. Bye, guys. Thank you again to MyHeritage for sponsoring today's video. Make sure, again, you go in the description of this video and get your 14-day free trial.